Hey there! Tonight, we're sinking into something soft, silken, and completely soul-crushing. Welcome to ancient Egypt, land of golden gods, sacred geometry, and very uncomfortable truths. Because while the history books love pyramids and pharaohs, they tend to skip over a certain profession. The male concubine. Yes, that was a job. And no, you didn't apply. You were chosen. Which is a fancy way of saying reassigned permanently. So get ready to bathe in oils, sleep on marble, and slowly lose every shred of autonomy you thought you had. It's not romantic. It's not glamorous. It's decorative captivity in linen. Before we strip down your free will and wrap it in imported perfume, do me a small favour. Like this video if your fingers still work. Subscribe if being informed and horrified at the same time is your thing. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it? Bonus points if you're horizontal. Horizontal is the vibe tonight. Now dim the lights, maybe light a candle. Or, better yet, have someone light it for you. Because in a minute, you won't be allowed to touch fire. Let your mind go slack. We're headed somewhere humid, golden, and deeply involuntary. Congratulations, you've just been selected. That's the word they used, at least. Selected. Like it's a prize or a compliment, or something you should smile about. But your mother isn't smiling. Neither is the priest who signed the scroll with a hand that shook just a little too much. You were 13, maybe 14, depending on how they count the moons in this part of the valley. And now you belong to the palace. You don't really know what that means. No one tells you. There's no welcome packet, no job description. Just a cart, a creaking wooden cart that smells like crushed lotus and old sweat, bumping its way toward the capital with you, and 5 other boys who don't know whether to cry or act brave. Some do both. One tries to run. He doesn't make it far. They don't beat him. That would bruise the merchandise. But the warning is clear. You leave when you're told to leave. You speak when you're told to speak. You breathe if it suits the room. They don't say the word concubine. Not yet. That comes later, whispered behind half-closed lattice doors or spat by eunuchs with eyes like polished stones. For now, you are a flower of the court, a phrase so gentle it could be embroidered on linen. You're being elevated. You're to serve in the house of beauty. You are fortunate. That word gets thrown around a lot. Fortunate, like the gods, personally reached down and plucked you from obscurity just to make you into an ornament. Your village was small, dusty, full of goats and silence. You had a mother, a sister, a name that now feels like it belonged to someone else. Back then your hands were rough from grinding grain, your feet wide from walking barefoot, and your dreams were basic. Food, sun, maybe a girl who smiled at you from across the market. Now your hands will be softened with scented oils, your feet rubbed with unguents, and your dreams replaced. The palace appears on the horizon like a mirage that forgot how to disappear. White stone, carved columns, walls so tall they look like the gods got bored and started stacking mountains. You expect someone to cheer. Maybe the driver. Maybe one of the boys. But the only sound is the wheels grinding against the sand. A falcon cries overhead, circling once before vanishing into the heat. That's it. That's your fanfare. They bring you through a side gate, not the grand one with the golden arch and the mosaic of the sun, God blessing the pharaoh. No. You come through the door used for deliveries. You're not an honoured guest. You are cargo. Inside, the air is thick with perfume, charcoal smoke, and something unidentifiable that coats your lungs like syrup. The walls are painted with gods who watch you without blinking. One of them holds an ankh, another has the head of a jackal. You don't know their names, but you know their gaze. It says, you are seen, you are weighed, you are nothing, you're told to strip. Not by a man, by a woman, older, sharp-eyed, and draped in layers of linen that rustle like secrets. She doesn't look at you the way your mother did, or your sister. She looks at you like you're a loaf of bread, something to be examined for cracks and mould. She sniffs, clicks her tongue, and points to a basin. The water is lukewarm and smells faintly of herbs. You wash, then you wash again, then again. It doesn't matter how clean you are. You will never be clean enough. A eunuch enters. Tall, silent, his face unreadable, like it was carved out of marble and someone forgot to give it emotions. He has a scroll in one hand and a knife in the other. For a moment, your stomach seizes. But no, not yet. He's just trimming your nails. For now. Your clothes are taken. In their place, a new set. Soft linen dyed pale blue, embroidered with tiny hawks. It's the nicest thing you've ever worn, and you already hate it. It fits too well. Like it was made for you before they even knew your name. Or maybe they always knew. Maybe your village priest sold your future for a tax break, and a promise not to burn the barley fields. You'll never know. They teach you how to walk again. Not because you forgot, but because your village boy shuffle offends the marble. You must glide, float, move like a reed in the Nile. They teach you to speak slowly, to never raise your voice, to bow not just with your head, but with your whole being. There is an art to subservience here. It's not about survival, it's about performance. You learn new names. None of them are yours. You're called Beloved One. You're called Precious Flower, Moon Calf, Sweet Reed, Property of the Horizon Chamber. Every room has its own name for you. Every servant their own tone. You belong to no one and everyone. The guards ignore you. The scribes glance. The high priest offers you a date and asks you to smile. You do. You have to. He likes smiles. Night comes slowly in the palace. Torches flicker. Musicians pluck strings made from gut and gold. You're not yet part of the music. You wait behind a screen with the others. One boy bites his lip until it bleeds. Another hums tunelessly, eyes wide and distant. A girl, older, sharper, tells you to count your blessings. At least you're not digging graves, she says, laughing without joy, unless you count your own. And then you are called, not by name. You don't have one anymore. You are summoned. A hand gesture, a nod, a flick of the wrist that means, now, you, come, you walk. The floor is polished obsidian. Your reflection stares up at you like a ghost you haven't met yet. Every step feels like it echoes through your bones. Ahead is a room filled with light, soft music, and cushions that cost more than your entire village. The air tastes like incense and expectation. Someone laughs, someone sighs, and you? You stand at the threshold, knees locked, spine straight, heart hammering. Because now, officially, you are here. You are in the House of Beauty. You're a male concubine of ancient Egypt. And your life, as you knew it, has just been sacrificed on an altar of silk. The first lesson you learn is that you don't speak unless spoken to. The second is that you smile but not too much. Too much, and they think you're mocking them. Too little and you're cold. There is a precise geometry to your expression. Your eyes must look soft. Your lips pliant. Your posture reverent, but not cowering. They want grace, not fear. Fear is for the lower servants, your decoration, breathing perfume. You must shimmer, not tremble. They parade you like an offering, but no one tells you what you're being offered for. You think you know. You've heard the whispers. The rumours traded like figs between the kitchen boys. The last flower that arrived from a village near yours. He lasted 2 seasons. No one talks about what happened after, just that the cart returned empty. You are brought to the Hall of Pleasures, which sounds far more joyous than it feels. It's quiet here. Too quiet. Like the room itself is listening. The walls are painted with scenes of banquets and dances, but none of them smile. Their eyes are flat, their mouths small. You wonder how many of them were real. How many boys like you ended up immortalized in pigment and plaster, their faces preserved forever in gold leaf, while their names were swept into the dust. Your new name, or at least the one whispered to you by a high-ranking chamberlain with wine on his breath, is Sephai. It means to be pleasing. That's not a name. That's an instruction. You say thank you anyway. You're told to memorize the names of the royal wives. All of them. First wives, junior wives, favoured wives, ceremonial wives. Even the ones who haven't been seen in months, but are still considered alive for tax reasons. You're also to know the preferences of certain high priests, visiting nobles, and foreign dignitaries who might request entertainment. You are not the entertainment, not yet, but you're a trainee. And the line between observing and performing is gossamer thin. There's a man in charge of you now. His title is unclear, something between steward and handler. He doesn't introduce himself. He doesn't need to. His word is law in your corner of the palace. He walks with a carved ivory staff that never touches the floor, held aloft by a boy your age with eyes that don't focus on anything anymore. You learn quickly. Look at the man's mouth, not his eyes. His eyes are too fast. His mouth is where the orders come from, where your fate lives. He has you practice walking across a length of onyx tile, again, 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 until your steps make no sound, until your breathing matches the rhythm of the water clock in the hallway, until you forget what it felt like to move for yourself. If you falter, he sighs. If you cry, he leaves the room. If you perform well, he claps once, quietly, the same sound he might make if a bird flew past and didn't poop on him. You are not praised, you are confirmed. Then come the cosmetic lessons. You are plucked, waxed, buffed. Your eyebrows are shaped into soft arches that match the style of the Queen's favourite mural. Your skin is rubbed with powdered alabaster and honey, your lips tinted with crushed carmine beetle. It stings. You don't flinch. You're learning. You must never look like you are altered. You must appear effortless, like beauty just happened to you by divine accident. A healer, or someone who claims to be one, checks your teeth, your nails, your breath. He asks if you've ever been sick. He doesn't wait for the answer. He makes a note on a papyrus scroll and drops a bitter resin ball onto your tongue. You chew. It tastes like tree bark and regret. It will purify you. You will spend the next 2 nights vomiting. The beds here aren't beds. They're stages. Slabs of lacquered wood draped in linen so fine they whisper when you move. They give you your own cubicle, not a room, of course. That would imply privacy. You get a curtained alcove next to 4 others. Everything is shared. Air, gossip, insomnia. At night, you don't sleep. You lie still. You listen to the palace breathe. The guards shuffle. The torches crackle. Somewhere, someone is crying into a cushion that costs more than your father ever made in his life. In the corner of your alcove, a small idol watches. It's meant to protect you. Or curse you, it's unclear. You dream of water, but always just out of reach. By the second week, you start to forget your old life. Not because you want to, but because the palace demands it. Your language shifts, your voice softens, the calluses on your hands fade. You're no longer a boy from the village of reed roofs and cow dung. You are Sephe, sweet reed of the House of Beauty. A title, not a person. Your body becomes a project, sculpted, softened, starved just enough to keep you delicate. Meals are portioned. You eat fruits with names you can't pronounce, seeds soaked in rosewater, meat only if your cheeks look too hollow. If you get sick, you're isolated, not out of concern, out of optics. You must always look like the embodiment of health, even if your bones ache and your smile trembles at the edges. You try once, just once, to talk to a guard, a tall man with kind eyes. You ask him gently where he's from. He doesn't answer, just looks past you, like you were a column. Later that night, you hear the steward muttering about boundaries. The next day the guard is gone. No one mentions him again. The girls are sharper than you. They were born into this. Some were sold by parents with debts. Others arrived after being gifted by provincial governors hoping to curry favour. They know the hierarchy, the traps, the silent wars that unfold between silk curtains and sandalwood fans. One girl, Kemi, tells you the real rules. Rule 1, don't cry where someone important can see you. Rule 2, never get attached to anyone in the palace. Rule 3, if someone calls you darling, check their tone before you smile. You ask her how long she's been here. She shrugs, says she stopped counting after the last eclipse. Then she adjusts your collar for you, tilts your head, and says you're doing fine. She doesn't sound convinced. There are lessons every day now. Poetry, posture, how to pour wine without looking at the cup. You're taught how to sing, but not from the throat, from the diaphragm, like you're summoning emotion from your stomach. They want your voice to tremble just slightly when you speak of longing. You practice lines from ancient love stories written on crumbling scrolls and recite them while staring at a wall painted with the goddess Hathor. You're supposed to feel it. Yearning, beauty, divine submission. You feel nothing, just tired. They test your loyalty with small things first. You're asked to report when someone speaks out of turn, to note which boys are late for lessons. At first, you resist. Then one day, the boy in the cot next to yours vanishes. His things are gone by morning. No one speaks his name. So the next time they ask, you answer. You tell them what they want to hear. You learn the art of lying with grace. And then comes the real test. They take you to a chamber where the pharaoh might visit. Not today, but soon. You're told to prepare the room, light incense, arrange fruits, lay out cushions in specific shapes. The shapes matter. They mean something. Power, fertility, control. You do it carefully, your hands steady, your face blank. When the steward inspects your work, he nods. That's the closest thing to joy you've seen on his face. He brushes something off your shoulder, and for a moment you think he might say something human. But all he says is, "Good. The Queen's nephew prefers them calm." You do not ask what that means. You know now. You do not sleep the night before your first presentation. That's what they call it. A word that sounds like scrolls and statues, not skin and silence. You lie still in your cot, staring at the embroidered ceiling, each thread a reminder that beauty can be weaponized. That art in the right hands is not for expression, it's for control. You've been perfumed. Not spritzed, not dabbed, submerged. Your skin smells like blue lotus and sandalwood. You don't smell like a person anymore. You smell like an altar. The room you're brought to is circular, sunken and soft. Cushions everywhere. The air is thick with incense, the kind that makes you feel floaty and half detached, like maybe none of this is really happening. But it is. Every moment is real, and it's being memorized by 100 painted eyes on the wall. The Queen's nephew, the one they warned you about, is not much older than you, but he looks like he's never had to bend down for anything in his life. Not a coin, not an apology, not a person. He smiles like it's a skill, not a reflex, and his fingers never stop moving. Over his ring, the lip of his goblet, the gold chain around his neck. Fidgeting, but in a way that implies power, not nerves. Like he's winding up before a command. He doesn't speak to you at first, just looks. Studies you like you're an offering to a god he's only mildly impressed with. Then he gestures. You sit. He gestures again. You pour. You pour wine like it's the most sacred thing you've ever done. Not too fast, not too slow. Eyes down, wrist turned just enough to suggest grace, but not arrogance. He hums. You try to guess if that's approval. Then he speaks. He asks where you're from. You answer. Then he laughs. Not at the answer, at the way you say it, the accent, the village, the peasantry woven into your vows. You try to smile. You succeed. Barely. It's not a real smile. It's the kind you give when your life depends on looking unbothered. And somehow, that amuses him even more. He tells you to relax, as if that's an option. As if your muscles haven't been clenched for weeks. When he finally reaches for you, not violently but casually, like one might reach for a fig, your body doesn't flinch. Not because you're ready, but because you've trained it not to disobey. You've been rehearsing this since the first day they bathed you in wine-scented water and told you that beauty was your new profession. That pleasure, real or faked, was the currency you'd survive on. That silence was your contract. Later, much later, when you return to your alcove, the steward gives you a nod. That's it. No praise, no comfort. Just the acknowledgement that you've crossed a threshold. You're no longer in training. You're official. You're certified silk. A temple of flesh for borrowed pleasure. The kind no one admits to, but everyone participates in. You want to cry, but not because of what happened. You want to cry because you didn't cry. Because a part of you was waiting to break, and it didn't. And now, you're not sure if that's strength or surrender. Maybe both. Maybe that's the worst part. In the days that follow, the palace shifts around you. Servants whisper your name, or what passes for it, with new tones. Some envy, some pity, some warning. The girls look at you differently. Not unkindly, but with the resigned solidarity of someone who's seen your future and knows you won't like it. Kemi offers you a dried fig and doesn't say a word. It's the kindest thing anyone's done for you in weeks. Your schedule becomes less predictable. Some days, you're summoned before dawn to prepare for a ceremony. Other days, you spend hours oiling your skin and reciting love poems into empty halls while the steward listens from the shadows, occasionally correcting your posture or the curve of your hand. You begin to forget what time feels like. The days melt into one another like wax left too long in the sun. You are gifted jewellery. Not for you to own, of course, for you to wear. heavy gold collars that chafe, anklets that dig into your skin, rings you're not allowed to remove, even when you sleep. They call them adornments, but they feel like shackles made to shimmer. You carry them anyway, because sparkle distracts from silence. One evening, you're summoned by a new face, a diplomat from Nubia. He doesn't speak your language, but that doesn't matter. The steward translates, not your words, your actions, your worth. He is docile, he says. He is trained. The diplomat looks you over like a man considering a horse he might rent. Then he nods, and you are dismissed. You hear them discussing favours. You try not to understand. You start dreaming again. Not of your village. Those memories are fuzzy now, like they belong to a play you once watched. You dream of running, of sand and wind and no walls, of feet pounding against earth that isn't polished, of breath that's yours and yours alone. Every time you wake up just before you escape. That's how the dream works. It teases you with freedom, then rips it away before dawn. Some nights, the boys whisper about escape. Not serious plans, just fantasy. They joke about climbing the palace walls, swimming across the Nile, disguising themselves as scribes or livestock. You all laugh, too loudly. You laugh because the alternative is remembering that the last boy who tried to leave now lives as a cautionary tale painted on the floor of the disciplinary chamber. You stop asking questions about who you are, about what's expected, about what happens next. Not because you don't care, but because the answers don't help. You already know them. You know that your body is currency, your smile is armour, and your silence is a contract written in scented oils and ghosted dreams. But then something strange happens. One afternoon, while arranging a bowl of figs in a guest chamber, you catch your reflection in a polished copper plate, and for a moment, a fleeting, terrible moment, you don't recognise yourself. Not in the physical sense. You know the curve of your jaw, the tilt of your eyes, but the way you're standing, the set of your mouth, the softness in your gaze that doesn't feel like innocence. It feels like erasure. You realise you've become beautiful. The way they wanted, the way they shaped you. You've become exactly what the palace sculpted you into, and you hate it. Not because beauty is wrong, but because it was never yours to choose. They carved it into you like hieroglyphs onto a temple wall and told you to be grateful. You're not. You're many things now. A favourite, a possession, a silent performer in a golden cage. But grateful? No, you've burned through that. At night, when the air turns cold and the cicadas hush, you press your ear to the stone wall behind your cot and listen. You don't know what you're listening for. Maybe nothing. Maybe just the sound of your own stillness. The rhythm of your own breath, unobserved. It's the only time that feels real anymore. And if, on certain nights, you whisper your real name, the one they took, into the stone, just to hear it bounce back, that's nobody's business but yours. The palace is beautiful. Everyone agrees. It's carved into existence by hands you'll never meet, soaked in incense, and polished daily by a tiered army of invisible backs. The ceilings stretch higher than your old gods. The walls gleam with inlaid lapis and gold that glints in the candlelight like it knows it's better than you. Everything here whispers luxury, but not comfort. Comfort implies safety. The palace is not safe. It is elegant, dangerous, decorated like a god's jewel box and about as humane. You learn this immediately, the way a barefoot child learns fire is hot, by standing too close and being burned for the curiosity. There are no corners here, no privacy, no slouching. The rooms are open, sprawling, airy, designed to impress and intimidate at the same time. Even the shadows are arranged just so. There are plants with leaves bigger than your torso, trees growing from pots that required 12 men and a divine blessing to move, and fountains that gurgle softly, not to refresh, but to remind you that someone else controls the plumbing. Someone who will never know your name. Your living quarters are nestled behind the House of Perfume, near the music chamber, but far enough from the kitchens to remind you that hunger is a choice made by others. The walls are plastered in ochre and cream, cracked in places where the heat swells too hard against the pigment. No one repairs the cracks. They're decorative now. Historical trauma made chic. The air is thick, always, with scent, with heat, with watching. Perfume clings to the walls like memory. Frankincense, myrrh, cinnamon, blue lotus, they hang around your nostrils like a warning. Do not sweat, do not stink. Do not forget that your worth here is olfactory. The moment your body smells like itself, you become less. The floor beneath your feet is stone, cool at dawn, searing by noon. Your bare soles grow calluses in strange, symmetrical patterns, shaped by the tiles, the pacing, the tension. You don't walk like you used to. You hover now. Not because you've ascended, but because the palace makes noise a sin. Every sound you produce is a threat to the illusion of harmony. You learn to silence your footsteps, your breathing, your emotions. You become acoustically harmless. Above you, the ceiling is painted with constellations, stars that no longer feel metaphorical. Every time you look up, it's a reminder. You're small, not quaint, not poetic, just inconveniently present. The pharaoh has stars on his ceiling because he wants to remember that the heavens bend for him. You have them because someone thought it would be ironic. Your bed, if you can call it that, is a raised platform made of stone, draped in linen. Not just any linen. Temple soft, the steward once called it. Woven from flax, picked by the purest hands and bleached in sun, blessed by priests who haven't smiled since the last eclipse. The fabric is fine, yes, but not forgiving. It slips beneath you like it wants you off it. No mattress, just layers. Cushions shaped like decorum, every crease aligned. If you bleed on it, you pay. If you sweat on it, someone else pays. And they'll remind you of that with every hissed breath. You're assigned a servant. You're not allowed to call them that. The steward insists on assistant, but everyone knows what it is. A child younger than you, maybe 9, maybe 10, whose job is to clean the space around you while pretending you don't exist. They fold your garments before you remove them. They pick up your cup before you set it down. They brush your hair while your mind tries to leave your body politely. You try not to speak to them, at first out of pity, then fear, then numb habit. One day they disappear. You don't ask why. You don't get a replacement. You just learn to pour your own water in silence, pretending it's a spiritual act and not a reminder that even invisibility has a shelf life. The bathrooms, or the architectural nods toward them, are communal, barely divided by thin curtains that sway in the breeze like judgmental ghosts. There are copper basins for washing, jars of scented oil for afterward, and a drainage system that's only functional when the Nile feels generous. If you want to bathe, you must request it. If you want hot water, you must earn it. If you want privacy, you must die. There are mirrors here. bronze, polished to the point of near delirium. They don't reflect, they accuse. Every time you catch your face, it looks unfamiliar. Too composed, too symmetrical, too deliberate. Your expressions feel rehearsed, like someone taught you how to smile, how to soften, how to nod in passive delight. You look like the fantasy version of someone who used to have opinions. The food is exquisite, or so they say. You wouldn't know. You don't eat what the court eats. Your meals come in covered bowls, delivered by a woman who never makes eye contact and always smells like old wheat. Inside the bowls, figs, pomegranate seeds, soft cheese if you've been good, pulses soaked in honeyed vinegar, a small square of bread that is too dry to chew and too symbolic to throw away. You nibble. You thank no one. You swallow your hunger like a song. Water is precious. Not because it's rare, the Nile is generous this season, but because it's rationed. You are allowed 3 sips with each meal. Not 4. 3. If you ask for more, they assume your throat is dry because you've been speaking out of turn. Or worse, singing for someone you shouldn't have been. There are birds in the courtyard. Herons. Ibises. Sacred things, or so you're told. They walk freely, unbothered, pecking at figs and bits of grain that fall from the nobles' tables. You're told not to touch them, not to look at them too long. They are wholly unlike you. You're ornamental, decorative. Replacing the birds would cost less. But the birds belong to a god. You belong to the steward. Every wall is painted, every inch, no blank space. Gods in profile. Men with jackal heads, women with lotus eyes and smiles shaped like inevitability. The murals stretch on and on, depicting rituals, births, battles, victories that never really happened, and parables no one believes anymore. And always in the corner, a figure kneeling, offering, bowing, always silent, always smaller than everyone else. You recognise the pose? It's the one you use. The temperature never makes sense. Mornings are cold, like the stone remembers death. Midday burns through your robes. Nights shift again, suffocating in warmth that lingers like guilt. You sweat through your linens. You try to dry them without being seen. You learn the art of folding damp fabric to look crisp. You learn the smell of your own panic. You're not allowed to speak during meals. Not just yours, any. Even if you're present at a noble's table, sitting 2 paces behind, kneeling on a cushion made from the skins of animals bred for softness, you must be silent. The conversations drift over you like incense, thick, scented, and not meant for you to understand. They talk of taxes, of temple politics, of grain yields and prophecy, of who was seen with whom, of which servant coughed too loudly, of which foreign boy needs breaking in. You learn new sounds, the sound of measured laughter, the sound of goblets clinking at specific intervals, the sound of footsteps that mean punishment is coming. You learn that sandals make different noises when worn by someone angry. You learn that silence itself has species. Heavy, anticipatory, mourning, strategic. You're not allowed to run. Not for exercise, not for fun, not for fear. Running implies panic. Panic implies something is wrong. And in the palace, nothing is wrong unless someone important says it is. Sometimes the sun hits the hallway just right, and the whole place glows, not metaphorically, but physically. The gold leaf on the columns flares. The tiles warm under your feet. The whole palace becomes a god's eye, and for 1 second you forget where you are. You feel awe, beauty, a flicker of wonder. But then a voice calls your name. Not your name, but the one they gave you. And the moment passes. You turn, you bow, you become architecture again. Somewhere in the northern wing, there is a room filled with scrolls. It smells like time forgot it on purpose. Dust, ink, the dry sweetness of brittle papyrus. You aren't allowed inside, but once, while passing by with a tray of wine and honey, the door stood slightly open and you glimpsed it. A cavern of silence and memory. Stacks upon stacks, each one a whisper from someone who lived, bled, prayed, and still didn't get to choose their own ending. You wonder if there's a scroll with your name on it. Not your title, your name, the real one. Tucked between tax ledgers and temple manifests. Written down by someone who thought you might matter later. You'll never know. You'll never get close enough to read your own story. That luxury belongs to scribes with straight backs and ink-stained fingers. Men who speak with confidence and never worry if their mouths are too soft, their laughter too inviting. The garden is nearby, if you can call it that. A rectangle of life crammed between stone and more stone. Palms, reeds, a trickle of canal water, and flowers arranged by the priestesses of Hathor for spiritual balance. You're allowed in it once a week, always under supervision. You walk the edges slowly, trailing your fingers over petals with names more beautiful than their uses. Amaranth for endurance, henna for humility, mandrake for desire. All metaphors, all lies. You're never alone, even when no one is visible, even when the hallways echo only with your own footsteps and the faint music of a distant harp. You know, there was always someone watching, someone behind a screen, behind a curtain, behind a carved panel made to look decorative, but placed at perfect height for observation. You start walking like someone is always behind you, because they are. You forget what it means to be unobserved. Even in your dreams you feel watched. The acoustics of the palace were engineered by madmen or geniuses. Every whisper carries, every sob, every breath you take too fast. Your body betrays you, your emotions echo, so you learn to silence even your grief. Cry into the pillow only when the wind outside howls loud enough to mask it. Cough only when the cymbals clash in the performance hall. Laugh only when someone else starts first, and stop before they do. There are rules that no one writes down. You learn them through mistakes. You sit one cushion too close to a priestess. You don't sit again for a week. You compliment a noble's jewellery without being prompted. You wear the same outfit for 3 days until you remember your place. You're not punished loudly. That would make it real. You're corrected quietly, which is worse. A gesture here. A withheld favour there. You're sculpted by absence. Moulded by disapproval. There are animals in the palace. Cats, mostly. Elegant, worshipped, spoiled beyond belief. They belong to the queens, the princesses, the high priestesses. They eat better than you. They wear amulets. They're brushed twice a day and never told no. One of them once sat in your lap during a ceremony. You froze, unsure if it was a test. It wasn't. The cat stayed, slept. You didn't move for an hour. That was the closest you came to affection all month. Some rooms are forbidden, not by decree but by design. The floor changes, the lighting shifts. The air itself hardens. You feel it in your spine, that prickle that says, you do not belong here. You step back instinctively, and a guard you never noticed raises an eyebrow just enough to confirm what you already knew. That this place is not yours, that nothing ever will be. That your entire life now exists in rooms where the light is filtered and the windows don't open. Speaking of windows, there are many. They let in light, but not air. They're narrow, arched, covered with delicate screens carved into the shapes of sacred geometry. Enough to hint at the outside world, but never enough to let you touch it. You can see the horizon, the fields, the river, the distant silhouettes of people who have never smelled like cinnamon oil against their will. They wave to boats, they laugh in full volume. You watch, you don't wave back. You stop doing that after the third time no one noticed. The light in the palace is always filtered. Sunlight is diluted through curtains. Torchlight flickers from polished copper bowls mounted on jackal-shaped sconces. Nothing is too bright. Nothing is clear. You begin to live in the in-between. Twilight, flicker, hush. Your eyes adjust. Your sense of time fractures. You begin to measure your days in sandal steps and torch replacements. In the courtyard, ceremonies happen. Always elaborate. Always sacred. Dancers move like reeds in the wind. Priests chant syllables that feel like spells. Incense clouds the sky. You're allowed to kneel at the perimeter. Not to participate. Never that. You kneel to be seen kneeling. One time, your eyes lingered on a dancer a moment too long. You weren't punished. But that night, your dinner came without honey. Message received. The walls are cool in the morning. If you press your cheek against them before anyone wakes, you can pretend they're the earth, that they lead somewhere, that behind this slab of limestone there's more than plaster and protocol. Maybe something wild, something green. You know better. You do it anyway. Small rebellions. Private ones. Like breathing with intention. Like blinking slowly when someone calls you beautiful. You're not permitted to yawn. It's considered vulgar. Even when exhausted. Even when the rituals stretch past midnight and your spine threatens to fold into itself. You must sit alert. Smiling faintly. Eyes soft. Hands folded in your lap like promises you never made. One boy nodded off during a harvest blessing. He didn't return to his cot that night. The steward claimed he was sent to assist in the temple kitchens. No one believed it. The kitchens don't need beautiful boys. They need strong ones. And he was small. You're not permitted to age. That's not a rule exactly. More of an expectation, like the sun rising or the pharaoh winning every battle. You're to remain soft, dewy, uncreased. You're inspected for signs of time. A wrinkle, a dark spot. Even a scratch from an overly affectionate noble's ring can mark you. The physician has creams. They sting. You use them anyway. You learn to lie still with a paste on your face, while praying the gods forget you just long enough to heal. There is a bird, not the sacred kind, just an ordinary one, that nests above the perfume chamber. It chirps at dawn, every morning, loudly. Someone asked to have it removed. The steward refused, said it was natural ambience. You begin waking to that sound instead of the guards tapping. It becomes your marker, your anchor. One piece of the world doesn't care what you look like or who you serve. You cherish it, which means eventually it will vanish. You forget what the sky looks like without filter, without pillars in the way, without the air tasting faintly of old incense and freshly crushed egos. The sky you knew once was wide, honest, ugly sometimes, but real. This one is always pretty, always aesthetic. A painted ceiling pretending to be open air. You begin to confuse ceiling murals for weather. You catch yourself looking up at a flock of geese painted in flight, and wondering if they're early this year. And then you realise the palace has no seasons. Not really. No wind, no storm, no crackle of firewood or sudden rainfall. just mild shifts in temperature, controlled like everything else. The fig trees in the garden always bear fruit. The canals are always full. The walls always gleam. Nature exists here in curated fragments. A sprig of papyrus in a clay vase. A basket of grapes rotated to hide the bruises. Nothing wild, nothing messy. Just the idea of life, bottled and scented. You used to track the time of year by the smell of the Nile. How it swelled in late spring, flooded in summer, drew back in fall. Here, time is a hallway. Linear, repeating. The same steps, same oil lamps, same echoes. You forget what month it is. You forget what year. Someone mentions a festival coming up. You ask which one. They laugh. As if you were joking. You laugh too. You learn fast. There are instruments playing somewhere always. Flutes, lyres, harps strummed by invisible hands. The music is soft, slow, seductive. Not for dancing, for ambience. You learn to move to it, subconsciously. To time your steps between the beats. To soften your gaze with the rising notes. The music becomes your heartbeat. And one day it stops. For half a second. And you stumble. Not physically. But something inside you drops. A tiny death. You recover. You pretend not to notice. Everyone pretends with you. There's a hallway near the southern wing where voices don't echo. A design flaw, perhaps. Or a mercy. You walk there when you're allowed to fetch something. Oil, linens, a message. It becomes your confessional. You whisper things there. Not prayers, not wishes, just syllables. The shape of your name. The feeling of breath when no one owns it. One day someone else is already there. A boy, older, kneeling, eyes closed. Neither of you speak. You nod. He nods back. You never mention it again. The walls sweat during high summer. Not visibly, just a thin sheen that makes them shimmer slightly in torchlight. The servants blame it on the humidity. The priest says it's the gods weeping through the stone. The steward says nothing and orders more incense. You learn to take shallow breaths. Too deep, and the air sticks to your lungs like syrup. Your voice grows quieter in summer. Not from reverence, from conservation. There are games the nobles play, ridiculous things. Tossing carved bones into bowls. Guessing riddles written on fish-shaped ivory slats. Reciting poetry backwards after 3 cups of wine. You're occasionally brought in to watch, not to play, never that. Your role is to sit just close enough to be decorative, just far enough to be beneath interest. Sometimes they let you roll the dice. If you win, they laugh. If you lose, they laugh harder. You learn to lose well, to make losing look good. You begin to forget what touch means. Real touch. Not assigned, not ordered, not calculated for effect. No spontaneous pats on the shoulder. No fingers through your hair, unless they're checking for lice. No warmth that isn't followed by expectation. You touch things when you can. The wall, the floor, the edge of the water jar. You teach yourself to find comfort in temperature, in texture, in the feeling of your own weight, unsupported. There's a staircase behind the house of writing that leads to a small terrace. You're not supposed to know about it. You found it by accident. Sent to deliver a robe, turned the wrong corner. The terrace overlooks the outer courtyard, where merchants unload carts and speak in accents from far away. You hide there sometimes. 5 minutes at most. Just long enough to hear a voice not modulated by protocol. Just long enough to see someone sweat without shame. Then one day the door is sealed. No warning. No explanation. You don't ask. You don't look sad. You just find a new place to stare at things that don't belong to you. You're assigned new robes every full moon. Linen, always. Dyed in shades that match the Queen's current mood. You're peach one month, turquoise the next. There is a colour you dread. Soft lavender. It means you've been requested. Not by name, just summoned. Lavender means prepare. Lavender means the steward will stand closer than usual, adjusting your collar with fingers that smell like judgment. You grow good at stillness. Not just physical, emotional. You become a pond. Calm, undisturbed. Reflections ripple only if permitted. When you feel anger, real, hot, unfiltered, you swallow it. You chew it into something more photogenic. When you feel joy, you hide it. Joy here is suspicious. Too much, and they think you're plotting. Not enough, and they think you're slipping. There's no sound more terrifying than the rustle of approaching silk. Not footsteps. Not shouting. Not the clatter of a dropped dish. Silk means someone important. Someone who might remember your face tomorrow. Someone who can end your week with a snap of fingers and a politely worded note. When you hear silk, you look down. Not out of reverence, out of preservation. They hold festivals in the East Courtyard. Grand things. Fire dances, painted bulls, offerings to Ra and Osiris. You attend only when summoned. You watch from the edges, dressed like an ornament, posed like a devotional statue. Once, a priest poured wine into your mouth in front of the crowd. Part of a ritual, he said, to honour youth and beauty. You nodded, smiled. Your teeth stained purple. The crowd clapped. You wiped your lips discreetly before the wine could dry and crack them. They call this place a sanctuary. They're not wrong. It is a sanctuary for those with the keys, for those whose names are sung, for those who walk barefoot by choice and never have to bow. For you, it's something else. Not a prison. Not exactly. A prison has bars, a sentence, an end. This is different. This is curated captivity. A cage built from compliments, lotus oil, and implied promises. And when the wind does rise, carrying with it a faint trace of river mud or distant market spice, you inhale it like a thief, like someone stealing back a fraction of what they lost. And you are careful, always careful, because the palace remembers, and it does not forgive. There's no real concept of your day here. Time does not belong to you. It belongs to the palace, to its rituals, its moods, its appetite. If you're wondering when your shift starts, the answer is when the palace wakes up. If you're wondering when it ends, the answer is when you no longer matter. That's not printed on any papyrus. It's something you absorb, like smoke, like shame. You wake before the sun, not by choice. The torchbearers come first, sweeping through the inner hallways, relighting what the night has swallowed. Then the handlers appear. Their sandals make no noise. They don't need to knock. They simply stand at the foot of your cot until you blink yourself back into your borrowed body. Their eyes flick downward, checking your posture, your breath, your visible compliance. If you're slow to rise, they don't speak. They just mark it down. There's no breakfast. Not the kind that fills you. Not the kind that comforts. Instead, a copper tray is slid silently under your curtain. A dried date, a palm-sized circle of barley bread, a cup of water, warm, metallic, slightly cloudy. If you finish too fast, you're greedy. If you don't eat it, you're ungrateful. If you ask for more, you're delusional. The food isn't meant to nourish. It's a gesture. A reminder that survival is part of the performance. You begin the day with oil. Always the oil. The steward insists on it. A concoction of myrrh, safflower, frankincense, and something faintly acidic that no one explains. It smells like status. You rub it into your skin until you shimmer. Until you're technically flammable. Then comes grooming. Eyeliner for some. Lip stain if you've been requested. Perfumed powder dabbed beneath the arms, behind the ears, across the chest, like love letters to your own dehumanization. You are not permitted to dress yourself. That would imply choice. The robe is selected, steamed, scented, and offered by a boy younger than you who has been trained to avoid eye contact. You lift your arms like a statue. You don't speak. You don't fidget. You let them sculpt you into silk. If your hands tremble, they chalk it up to poor temperament. If you sneeze, they write it down as spiritual imbalance. You learn to be a quiet mirror. Next comes the assignments. They're posted on a tablet outside the Chamber of Rolls. No ceremony. Just your new reality carved in shallow glyphs next to your temple name. If you can't read, someone tells you. If you can, you read it alone, silently. Today, you're attending a poetry recital for the vizier's second son. Tomorrow, a ceremonial grooming session for a guest from the Eastern Delta. Later this week, you're on presentation rotation. A phrase that means be ready to smile at powerful strangers who might pretend not to notice how closely you resemble the god of youth. There is no off-duty. The palace doesn't have weekends, or lunch breaks, or boundaries. Your labour isn't defined by time, it's defined by appearance. If you're visible, you're working. If you're invisible, you're failing. There are no sick days. No, sorry, my back hurts. No, I'm just not feeling like an ethereal object of desire today. You do the job. Or someone else does it better. And prettier. And quieter. Walking is work. Smiling is work. Standing still is work, especially when you must do it in soft sandals that offer the arch support of wet leaves, with your weight balanced just enough to look casual, but never tired. You're a statue that breathes. You're a sculpture that blinks. Even blinking must be delicate, controlled. You once blinked too hard during a banquet, and were asked if you'd been crying. You hadn't. Yet. Your morning routine, which sounds gentle, almost indulgent, actually includes lessons. Every day. Not the kind that build you. The kind that smooth you into compliance. You are taught how to respond to compliments, how to refuse them, just shy of convincingly. You are taught posture while reclining, the most politically dangerous way to sit. You are told how to recite things you don't believe. Love poems, victory odes, blessings for men who call you son with their eyes and toy with their hands. There's one tutor who teaches you the old languages, not to empower, to impress. You learn a few lines in Babylonian, enough to make a visiting scribe smirk. You learn 2 poems in Canaanite, enough to sound exotic, but not enough to understand them. You repeat words you don't own, syllables like chains in velvet. Your day includes rehearsals, always rehearsals, for things that may or may not ever happen. You're taught how to stand behind a royal during processions, how to hold a fan without tiring, how to offer water without contaminating it with your presence. Once you're trained in the art of ceremonial stillness, standing motionless for hours while nobles dine, your only job to radiate serene beauty like a human incense burner. Sometimes your assignment is music, not to play, unless you've been trained, to listen, to be in the room draped in lavender or blue, and react just enough to be considered inspired. Too much enthusiasm is vulgar. Too little means you're ungrateful. You nod when the notes dip. You soften your gaze when they rise. You let your breath hitch just slightly during the third stanza. All performance. All exhausting. The labour isn't always decorative. Sometimes it's functional. You clean the private quarters of nobles who don't want to be seen cleaning. You carry trays heavy enough to make your shoulders ache, but not heavy enough to qualify as servant work, which you're not allowed to do, officially. You strip linens soaked in someone else's perfume and hang them in the sun like ghosts. You pluck flowers until your fingers sting, just so the offering bowls look sufficiently divine. You are corrected constantly, never with violence. That would leave a mark. You are corrected with sound. A throat clear, a clicking tongue, a single syllable from the steward, sharpened like flint. No, it slices. You adjust. You smile. You nod. You thank them for the lesson. You do not ask what you did wrong. You already know. Sometimes your labour is companionship. Not sexual, not overtly, just presence. You're placed beside someone important. A general, a priest, a bored cousin of the pharaoh's wife. Your job is to be attentive, silent, and absorbing. They speak, you nod. They vent, you react, but only with your eyes. You're an emotional sponge, soaked in other people's dissatisfaction. You leave with nothing but a headache and the knowledge that you served as a verbal dumping ground in expensive sandals. When you're not working, which is never, you are waiting. A different kind of labour. Waiting for the bell, for the call, for the note slipped under the curtain. Waiting is a job. One that keeps your muscles tense, your mind fogged, your hours hollow. You never let yourself be too far from ready. Your beauty must remain charged like a ritual blade, sheathed but gleaming. Waiting is more exhausting than performance. At least performance ends, and then comes inspection. Every few days, sometimes more, a full body evaluation, conducted by the steward, assisted by 2 attendants and a physician who smells like wax and basil. You stand still, arms out, chin up, robes adjusted. They check your posture, your skin tone, your weight, your scent, your nails. They check the whites of your eyes. They check your ankles for swelling. They check your thighs for blemishes. They check you the way a merchant checks a melon, tapping, sniffing, deciding if you're still ripe. If you're not, you get reassigned. To what? No one says. You don't ask. You just work harder. You sleep less. You smile more. You learn a new poem. You hold your breath a little longer under the bath water, just to prove you're still ethereal. No one tells you this, but performance becomes permanent. At some point, you stop returning to yourself. The role bleeds. The posture becomes reflex. The voice they trained you to use, soft, melodious, deferential, replaces your own. Even in dreams you speak beautifully. Even alone, your fingers move gracefully. It's not art anymore. It's muscle memory in velvet wrapping. And when you mess up, because you do, it's never spectacular. It's never the grand failure you fear. It's always small, subtle. A pause too long when a prince jokes about something awful. A breath drawn in when a priest leans too close. A second of forgetting who you're supposed to be. That's all it takes. They notice. They always notice. The steward doesn't shout. He doesn't punish you with whips or chains or drama. He simply changes your assignments. You're no longer in the music chamber. You're in the outer corridor, polishing brass fixtures with lemon rinds and whispers of what you could have been. You stand straighter. You apologise. You realign. You're rewarded with a nod. That nod is your paycheck. That nod is your salvation. You wear it like perfume. When guests arrive, nobles from far cities, priests from higher temples, cousins of cousins with questionable bloodlines, the palace becomes a theatre. The walls are scrubbed, the fountains blessed, the food doubled. And you? You're told to shine. That's the word they use. Shine. As if your soul is something to buff. You're sent to the bathhouse with the others. Scrubbed until your skin glows like polished stone. Oiled, powdered, draped in white. Then reviewed. Not for readiness, but for impact. If you're chosen, you accompany the reception. You don't speak. You don't eat. You smile. You hold a tray. You nod when spoken to. Sometimes they ask your name, and the steward answers for you. Sometimes they ask where you're from, and you lie. You're from wherever they need you to be from. Nubia, Thebes, the edge of the Red Sea. Exotic but not foreign. Familiar but unattainable. You become a myth wrapped in linen. After these events, your body feels used. Not because anyone touched you, just because being looked at that long, assessed, consumed with the eyes, scrapes something off you. You return to your cot and lie flat, arms at your sides, breath shallow. You don't cry. You don't even sigh. You just go still, like a statue waiting to be cleaned and put back on display. You're never congratulated for doing well. Just not corrected. That's the reward. Silence. A day without being told to adjust your posture, to arch your neck differently, to smile with less effort. No one says, "Good job." They just don't say anything. And in the palace, silence is not golden. It's bronze, maybe. Polished, but dull. You once had a friend here. Briefly. Another boy, live, funny. Sharp in ways you weren't. He made you laugh once. Not the court kind of laugh. The real kind. Sharp and stupid and too loud. The steward noticed. The next day you were both reassigned. Different wings. You saw him weeks later, standing by a visiting envoy. His smile was perfect. His eyes were empty. You never laughed with him again. There are drills for emergencies, fires, poison, the death of someone sacred. You're trained not to run, not to panic, not to interfere. If a priest collapses, you kneel. If a torch falls, you step aside. If the queen herself begins weeping, you lower your gaze and wait for instructions. Your job, in crisis, is to be ornamental. Unburned, unbothered, controlled. You are trained in the art of calm like it's a sacred rite. On certain days, your labour is religious. You are part of rituals you don't understand. You wear specific colours. You chant syllables older than the empire. You stand in formation with others, hands outstretched, palms turned just right to receive invisible blessings. Sometimes the high priest touches your forehead with wine-soaked linen. You pretend it means something. You feel nothing. That is your job. Then there is body maintenance. Not just grooming. Upkeep. You are waxed, plucked, filed, brushed, smoothed. You're scrubbed with salt and clay. Polished with stones that sting. Your lips are softened with balm. Your knees are examined for calluses. Your hair is burned slightly to purify it. The pain is never acknowledged. You're told to breathe through it, smile through it, radiate through it. As if radiance is a muscle, and yours needs constant stretching. Your robes are rotated. You never wear the same one 2 days in a row, even if no one saw it the first time. The scent of each robe must match your assignment. Lavender for sleep chambers, frankincense for council halls, rose for processions. If the smell fades, you're accused of negligence. If it's too strong, you're reprimanded for arrogance. The balance is precise. The expectation? Unspoken, the failure, loud. Sometimes you serve as a body double, for royalty, for statues, for gods if the scene calls for it. You stand while a sculptor studies your body, your spine, your chest, the way your fingers curve when relaxed. You're not allowed to speak. You're not allowed to shiver. The workshop is cold, always. You hold still while he carves someone else's legacy using your borrowed anatomy. You don't see the finished work. You never will. It's not about you. The worst labour is pretending it's not labour. Pretending it's art. Pretending it's honour. You once heard a noble describe you to another as a walking blessing. You smiled. He didn't see you. You smiled anyway. That's your job. To perform gratitude so convincingly that even your emptiness looks holy. Sometimes you're praised. Not directly, but in passing. That one's posture is improving. His jawline is symmetrical. This batch is better than the last. You hear it. It hits you like a thrown coin. Shiny, meaningless. Heavy only in the way it reminds you you're part of a batch. A harvest. A product grown and plucked at its peak and discarded when bruised. You are replaceable. That's not a secret. That's part of the design. You're told gently with smiles. The gods always send more. There are so many eager young men in the provinces. It's a privilege to age out. That last one is the palace's cruelest joke. That disappearing is an achievement. That being forgotten is a form of success. And yet, you work, you perform, you glide through corridors like wind wrapped in perfume. Because to stop would be the only real failure. And failure isn't punished with noise. It's punished with silence so complete you forget your own name. There's a part of the palace where you're not allowed to speak at all, not even in a whisper. It's called the Chamber of Still Air, and the name isn't poetic. It's literal. The room is sealed to keep out drafts and outside noise. The nobles say it's for meditation, reflection. The steward says it's for the soul to breathe. You go there twice a month with other boys like you, dressed in white, bathed in moonlight, and not much else. You kneel on mats that smell like myrrh and old sweat. You lower your eyes. You wait. That's the whole task. Wait. Be still. Radiate obedience through your silence. One night, a younger boy sniffled. Just once. The tiniest sound. His nose betrayed him. He was gone by morning. No one replaced him. His mat stayed empty for a week, then was quietly removed. You watched them carry it away folded in half, as if it had never held a human shape. There are tours you must attend. That's what they were called, tours. You're escorted through parts of the palace you don't usually enter. Guest gardens, the outer archives, the vestibules where higher priests receive divine messages via ink and innuendo. You are decoration, a visual aid. You wear pale blue, carry nothing, and smile like you've been personally blessed by Ra's second cousin. You walk slowly, gracefully. You do not speak. You're introduced as one of the chosen. You're not asked questions. You're observed, measured. Your fruit arranged on a platter, picked by the eyes. Sometimes, at the end of the tour, a guest lingers a bit too long on your face. That means your schedule changes for the next week. You don't ask how. You're required to learn choreography. Not dances exactly. Movements, ritual gestures. Ways to stand when the high priest enters. Ways to bow when a queen passes. Ways to extend a tray of offerings without looking directly at the recipient. You are drilled over and over. If your elbow drifts, if your weight shifts too soon, the instructor frowns. And then you repeat it, again, until your bones understand what obedience looks like. One morning, you're handed a script, a recitation, 10 lines of praise poetry meant to be spoken to a dignitary from Kush. You memorise it. Practice in front of a copper mirror. Learn where to place the emphasis. Not too much, or it becomes flattery. Not too little, or it's disrespect. The steward listens once, nods once, and that's all the feedback you get. At the ceremony, the dignitary doesn't even look at you. He's laughing with a priest while you speak. You finish your recitation into the space between his attention and your usefulness. No one applauds. The steward nods again, exactly the same way. You return to your cot with the taste of copper on your tongue, and no idea whether you succeeded. That's how labour works here. Not in results, in maintenance, in surviving the same performance over and over while pretending it's your calling. You're allowed to bathe once a day. Not because you need it, because it's part of your presentation. The bathhouse is shaped like a crescent, filled with still water that smells faintly of rose and minerals. You undress in silence. You enter in silence. You wash yourself under the gaze of the attendant, who sits in the corner with a tablet and a charcoal stick, noting how long each boy spends submerged. You don't get to choose the temperature. You don't get to linger. You don't splash. You do not speak. If you laugh, you're reported. If you sigh, you're watched. If you cry, you're forgotten. You keep your eyes on the water and pretend it's just water. Not a mirror, not a tomb, not a place to imagine slipping under and not returning. The linens you dry with are thin, always damp. You hang them back on the wooden peg, in the shape of a lotus, where they'll stay until the next rotation. You powder your feet. You dress yourself in silence. And when you step back into the hallway, you smile, because someone is always watching. There's a phrase the handlers use, ready for presents. It means you've been scrubbed, dressed, scented, and pre-approved for display. It means you might be placed in a ceremony, or seated on a cushion near a visiting general, or assigned to fan a noble's wine with a palm frond. It's not a compliment. It's a reminder that your body is not yours, that you exist for presence, not function, not voice, just presence. When the pharaoh walks through your wing, everything stops. You kneel. Everyone kneels. You hear his steps before you see him, a soft rhythm cushioned by sandaled reverence. You keep your eyes down. You do not breathe too loudly. You feel his presence like weather. Heavy, mythic, unreachable. Sometimes he speaks to the steward. Sometimes he doesn't speak at all. Once he looked in your direction and said, "That one has good posture." That was 3 months ago. You still think about it. You think about it while kneeling, while oiling your feet, while holding a bowl of pomegranate seeds you're not allowed to eat. That single sentence about your spine, your form, has become the closest thing you've received identity in weeks. There's another phrase, made for the chamber. You hear it whispered about the older ones, the boys with more composure than hope. It's not a promotion, it's a designation. It means you're being watched, considered, prepared. No one tells you when you've been selected. They just stop correcting your mistakes. That's when you know. The silence shifts. You're no longer a project, you're a product. You notice the difference. The attendants are gentler with your robes. The steward starts referring to you with modifiers. Graceful, consistent, easy on the eyes. You are moved from the middle row to the front row during recitations. You're invited to more processions. Your tray is switched from copper to polished bronze, and one morning your reflection in the mirror doesn't flinch when the door opens behind you. You've become something else. Not better, not higher, just more refined in your captivity. And that too is labour, because polishing your own disappearance takes work. Because showing up every day inside someone else's idea of beauty takes practice. Because carrying the weight of your own erasure with elegance, that's a full-time job. And there are no breaks. You are not at the bottom. That's what they tell you. That's how they keep you still. There are people below you, technically. The stable boys, the brick haulers, the ones who sweep pigeon droppings from the outer courtyards and live on gruel so thin it qualifies as a suggestion. You're told to be grateful, because your fingers are not calloused, because your work does not reek of manure, because when you walk past, some of them bow. You are not at the top either. That's not news. You've always known that. You can feel the hierarchy in the air. It's stratified like sediment, thickest at the top, getting heavier the further down you go. You breathe it in, and it sits in your chest like smoke. Every hallway reminds you, every gesture, every smile curved just short of kindness. The palace hierarchy isn't written on stone. That would be too honest. Instead, it's lived, embodied, enforced through glances, silences, the distance between cushions at ceremonial dinners. The way your name is spoken, or not. The way you're addressed in third person even while standing there, breathing. Above you are the nobles, of course. The families with bloodlines long enough to wrap around the palace twice. They wear layers not for warmth, but for status. Silk over linen over gold, stitched with symbols that say, "Don't speak unless summoned." They glide past you like fog. And if they stop, you bow. You smile. You thank them for noticing. There's a pecking order even among the noble guests. The ones close to the Queen get the best chambers. High windows, imported incense, servants who speak 3 dialects. The ones further down the line still outrank everyone else, but you can tell by how hard they try. Louder laughter, bigger gestures, a constant performance of belonging. You're familiar with that. You recognise the exhaustion in their posture, but you don't sympathise. They have exits. You don't. Above them are the priests. Not the kind who mutter prayers in sand-floored temples, the elite ones, the advisors, the interpreters of the divine. Men whose words carry weight not because of their wisdom, but because no one dares contradict a man with a jackal god carved into his cane. They walk like they're floating, their fingers stained with ink and pomegranate juice, their eyes always scanning, like they're looking for cracks in the foundation. You learn quickly. Never meet their gaze, they see too much, and say too little. Then come the royals, a breed apart. Their presence is less human and more atmospheric, a force that shifts the room before they even enter. The pharaoh is rarely seen, but his family, his wives, his half-brothers, his ceremonial cousins, and his future heirs drift through the palace like living relics. They do not walk, they arrive. You are taught to recognise them not by their faces, but by their scent. They are perfumed with exclusivity. You know it by now. You smell it before you hear the guards announce them. And finally, above them all, the steward. Not by rank, but by reach. The steward touches everything, approves everything, signs off on every movement, every robe, every name whispered through the walls. He's not royal, but he is feared. More than the priests. More than the pharaoh's brother, who once burned an entire servant wing for a bad fig. The steward doesn't burn. He erases. Silently. Surgically. One day you're learning a new poem. The next, you're gone. No fire, no ash. Just an empty cot and someone else wearing your perfume. The humiliation doesn't come from being seen as lesser. It comes from being almost seen. You're in proximity to power, but never included in it. You walk alongside thrones, but never sit. You hold the goblet, but never drink. You hear the secrets, but they are never for you. You become an expert at pretending. Pretending you're not listening. Pretending you don't understand the joke. Pretending you didn't just hear your own value assessed like livestock in a market. There are ranks among the concubines too. That's the cruelest trick. They divide you against yourselves. The favourables are the ones who've been chosen more than once. They get better robes, softer cushions, first access to fruit. They are smiled at in public. Occasionally asked for by name. Their confidence is dangerous. They walk differently. Like they matter. They don't. But for now, they seem to. That illusion is all it takes. Then there are the in-waitings, not quite selected, not quite ignored. This is where most of you live. Smiling just enough to be noticed. Never enough to be accused of presumption. You hover. You glide. You exist in draft form, hoping the gods edit you into relevance. You try not to envy the favourables, but you do. At the very bottom are the still, the ones who haven't been called in weeks, months, who walk with the posture of furniture, who eat slowly, sleep early, speak only when directly addressed. You learn to look through them, not out of cruelty, out of self-defence. They're ghosts in waiting. You don't want to catch what they have. And even here, even in this narrow circle of beauty and borrowed scent, there is a deeper line, the eunuchs. Some were born that way, some were made. You're not allowed to ask which, doesn't matter. They keep their eyes low, their mouths shut, their knowledge terrifying. They know the palace better than anyone. They've seen it all. They remember who touched whom, who fell out of favour, who used to smile and no longer does. You try to be kind to them. Sometimes they nod back. Sometimes they don't. You never push. They are not your peers. They are the bones of the building. You are trained never to complain. But it leaks out anyway, in sideways glances, in the way your hand trembles just slightly when the fruit tray passes you over again, in the way you breathe through your nose, not your mouth. Because open mouths are needy, and need is ugly. They tell you the palace is a gift. They tell you you're lucky to be here, but every day you offer pieces of yourself to a room that never says thank you. You're told to sit beside the high priest during the spring feast. You kneel for an hour before they realise the guest has changed. You're told to wear the blue robe today. The thread near the hem has frayed. You are told to walk slower. Your ankle aches for 3 days. You are told you are glowing. You are told you are slipping. You are told nothing. You begin to measure your worth in the silence between instructions. And when someone finally says your name aloud, your given name, the one no one is supposed to know, you flinch, not because it hurts, but because you had almost forgotten it existed. You start to notice how everyone around you is always measuring. Measuring status, measuring danger, measuring how far they can lean without falling out of favour. The nobles measure each other by lineage, by proximity to the throne, by who was born to which mother, and whether that mother's name still echoes in the right corridors. The priests measure you by usefulness, by purity, by silence. The other concubines measure each other by weight, not literal weight, though that matters too. You can't be too thin. That means stress. You can't be too full. That means indulgence. You must hover somewhere between ethereal and technically alive. But no, the real weight that matters is attention. Who got a longer glance from the steward? Who was last seen speaking to the lady of Wheat's youngest son? Who has the freshest bruise from being held too tightly by someone important? You don't speak of it, not directly. But the evidence is there, always, in how the oil is applied, who's allowed to linger in the garden, whose robe has a deeper shade of red, the colour of closeness, of interest, of reward. You envy. You hate yourself for envying. Then you envy again. They teach you to compliment others just enough to seem gracious, but not enough to lift them. Your praise must hover like mist, flattering but never nourishing. Say, you looked radiant last night, but never say, he couldn't take his eyes off you. That crosses a line. That creates hierarchy. And the only hierarchy allowed is the one that already exists. And the gods help you if you try to climb it. There's a boy who tried, not openly, just confidently. He held himself too straight, smiled too broadly, used a name in conversation before it was offered. It was small, the offence, but it was noticed, and punished the way only the palace punishes, not with wrath, but with exclusion. He wasn't scolded, he wasn't beaten, he was ignored, slowly, systemically, mercilessly. He was no longer assigned to banquets, he was passed over for processions. His oil ration was halved, his cot was moved nearer to the latrine chamber, under the guise of space management. He smiled through it all, until one day he didn't. Then he vanished, not gone, just removed. Rumour said he was reassigned to a temple in the lower provinces, as a labourer, a sweeper, someone whose beauty had expired. You try not to think about him, but you do. Every time you pass the mirror and wonder if your confidence is showing, the nobles humiliate you differently. It's not cruelty, it's curiosity. They ask questions that aren't really questions. Is that your real voice? Do you sleep like that? Can you even feel things like we do? You answer politely. Always politely. Because anything else would be arrogance. And arrogance, in your position, is suicide with better lighting. Once, a noble woman, drunk on something imported and potent, asked you if you were ever allowed to speak your mind. You smiled, said the correct thing. My purpose is to bring peace to the room. She nodded, as if you just said something profound, then burst into laughter. Loud, theatrical, not cruel, not intentionally. You laughed with her. Of course you did. That's how humiliation works here. It's always coated in civility. It smells like jasmine and finishes with applause. You're part of a caste so narrow it doesn't even have a name. Not quite servant, not quite sacred, not quite man, at least not in the way the palace defines manhood, with power, with inheritance, with the ability to own your future. You are what they made you into, admired but voiceless, precious but never protected, and sometimes humiliation comes from kindness. A priest once handed you a slice of melon during a particularly long festival. You weren't supposed to eat until the 5th hour, but he pressed it into your hand with a smile, a gesture, a whisper of grace. The steward saw. You were not punished. That would have been too obvious. Instead, the next day, you were assigned to a shadowed corner of the temple during morning devotions. Out of sight, behind the incense brazier. Close enough to hear the prayers, far enough to be missed. The melon was sweet. You tasted it the whole week. You never accepted food again. The hierarchy plays out in every movement. Where you kneel. How many steps you take before speaking. The tilt of your head when someone enters the room. The pause before rising. You are a living glyph. Every angle a message. And if the message is wrong, you are corrected. Once, during a royal visit, you placed a fruit tray too near the lady of music's favoured cousin. The steward whispered to you afterward, just one sentence. You're not here to imply closeness. You didn't sleep that night. Not out of fear. Out of clarity. You had forgotten for a moment what you were. You're a scent, a gesture, a pause. You're not a person. You are proximity. And proximity is a privilege you rent by sacrificing your own gravity. You watch new boys arrive, wide-eyed and upright. You see the glint of hope in their faces, the belief that maybe, just maybe, this place will lift them. That beauty is currency and charm is armour. You see yourself in them. You want to warn them. But warnings are not allowed, so you just adjust their robe, comb their hair, remind them to smile. You become their silence. And that too is hierarchy. Even your pain is ranked. One night, you sprain your wrist carrying a golden pitcher. You wrap it tightly. You don't report it. You finish your duties with one hand tucked carefully behind your back like it's part of your performance. The pain is sharp, but it's not hierarchical pain. No bruises from nobles, no rituals interrupted, so no one cares. No one can care. That would imply you matter. You learn to classify your suffering. There's the kind you express, quietly, strategically, when it might earn you attention or softness. There's the kind you bury, because to show it would cost you position, food, future. And there's the kind that never fully heals, the slow burn of being seen and never acknowledged. Not truly, not fully, not ever. One day during a festival for the goddess Hathor, you're dressed in gold. Not real gold, that's for the royals, but the illusion of it. A fine mesh of metallic thread, woven through cream-coloured linen, designed to shimmer like sun off the Nile. You're told it's an honour, a rare privilege. Only a few are chosen to appear in these garments. The steward adjusts your sash himself, which is meant to feel like validation. It doesn't. You're placed near the temple gate, positioned beside an altar lined with figs, barley cakes, and lotus blooms. Your job is simple: exist beautifully. Embody serenity. Be a living offering to the divine. You kneel for hours. The nobles pass by and nod. Some smile. A few say, "Blessed be." One reaches out and touches your shoulder as if you're a relic. You don't flinch. You bow your head. You recite your inner script. This is not you. This is not you. This is not you. Later, a younger boy tells you how radiant you looked. You thank him. You don't say that your knees bled into the hem of your robe. You don't say that your thighs went numb by the third hour. You don't say that you felt less like a person and more like a trophy someone forgot to claim. This is what the palace does. It humiliates you with reverence. It tells you are sacred, then denies you agency. It says you are beautiful, then uses that beauty as an excuse to keep you powerless. It praises your discipline, then exploits it. You are divine, they say, but gods are worshipped from afar. Gods are dressed, cleaned, posed. Gods are spoken to, not listened to. Gods are not allowed to bleed where others can see. And then there are the moments. Small, unexpected humiliations, so subtle they barely qualify as cruelty. A noble asks if you can read, then laughs, surprised that you can. A priest forgets your name and calls you by the wrong one in front of others. A servant hands you the wrong robe, then corrects himself and whispers, "Apologies, I confused you with the older one." The older one is 3 months your senior. You start checking your reflection for lines. You find one under your eye. It's probably nothing. But the next day, you're moved to the second row during a ceremonial walk. No one says why. The hierarchy is coded into the walls, into the linens, into the order of the meal trays. It's in who gets the fresh figs and who gets the bruised ones, who's assigned to the western corridor, and who gets stuck near the candle storeroom that smells like melted regret. And the hardest part, it's not accidental, it's designed. The hierarchy is not a flaw in the palace, it is the palace. Without it, the place would collapse. Because if everyone mattered the same, if every boy, every servant, every voice were equal, then who would hold the fan? Who would kneel? Who would smile through the ache in his lower back while nobles debate the meaning of mercy? You are taught to aspire, but not too openly. You are taught to excel, but not to overshadow. You are taught to shine, but only when summoned. You are not allowed to have ambition. You're allowed to have promise. Promise is easier to control. Promise glows without making demands. Yet you've seen what happens when someone forgets this. There was a boy once, tall, poetic, soft-spoken, favoured for a time, chosen often, praised for his discipline. People whispered about him like he was ascendant. He made the mistake of believing it. One day he spoke without being spoken to, offered a suggestion about flower arrangements for a ritual. He was thanked, and the next morning his cot was stripped bare. No one spoke his name again. You didn't ask what happened. No one did. That's how humiliation becomes culture. Not through punishment, through vanishing. You learn to self-edit. Every gesture, every word, every breath. You laugh half a second after everyone else. You lower your gaze, not because you're afraid, but because humility is safer than recognition. You praise others strategically. You accept praise like it's a warning. You dress beautifully and pray to be invisible. The hierarchy is not just vertical, it's internal. You begin to rank your own thoughts, the ones you allow yourself to feel, the ones you store for later, in a hidden place behind your ribs where no incense reaches. You start silencing things before they form. Desire, hope, hunger. You feel them rising, and you gently, politely press them back down. Not now. Not here. Not you. You become fluent in your own erasure. And that, more than anything, is what the palace teaches. Not how to serve. Not how to kneel. Not how to glow without burning. But how to disappear while still being seen. Because in this place, that is the highest rank you can achieve. To be desired, but never demanding. To be adorned, but never adored. To be looked at and never truly known. There are gods everywhere. In the air, in the walls, in the dust. You can't turn a corner without encountering some version of divinity. A carved ibis with glass eyes, a lioness with gold leaf teeth, a falcon mid-flight, wings curled in permanent judgment. They perch above doorways, stare from the rim of your water bowl, whisper from papyrus scrolls tucked into temple alcoves that no one dares clean too thoroughly. The gods in this palace don't need to be present. They're implied. And their favourite weapon is belief. Not belief as in faith. Not the aching, hopeful kind that swells in the chest and keeps you warm when nothing else will. No, this belief is colder, sharper, designed. You are taught that order is divine, that hierarchy is sacred geometry, that to question your station is to spit in the face of Mayat, the goddess of balance, truth, and cosmic law. You are told that your beauty is a gift from the gods, and therefore it belongs to them. You are told your silence honours them. You are told your suffering sanctifies the space. You are told so often that eventually you stop questioning whether it's true. That's how belief works here. Not as revelation, but repetition. The priests teach it in layers. First, the stories. Osiris torn apart and reassembled. Isis tricking Ra with a snake, set drowning in his own shadow. They speak these tales like recipes, each detail a measurement of your insignificance. You nod, you memorize, you repeat. Then come the rules. You are to eat only when allowed, because food must align with lunar positions. You are to avoid sleeping on your left side, because that's where evil dreams enter. You are to smile during rituals, because Ra prefers gratitude. You are to feel no anger, because Hathor despises turbulence. You are to be silent before sunrise, because that is when the gods speak, and they don't like competition. Eventually, belief becomes behaviour, not because you agree, but because it's easier, because refusing makes you visible, and visible is dangerous. There is a priest named Nedja Ea, tall and brittle, whose voice is a song dipped in dust. He teaches theology in the afternoons to a select few worthy concubines. You are one of them, not because you asked, but because someone saw your posture and decided it looked devout. He says things like, "Control is the form of worship you perform with your body." He looks directly at you when he says it. He teaches that discipline is the highest offering, that restraint is divine currency, that pleasure, when uninvited, is theft. You copy it down with a reed pen on a tablet made from smoothed palm bark. You don't ask what happens when pleasure is demanded. That question isn't permitted. It's not in the hymns. And when you say the prayers, when you light the incense, when you recite the 42 negative confessions, I have not lied, I have not killed, I have not raised my voice unnecessarily. You wonder if the gods are listening, or if they're just mirrors, reflecting back the will of those who speak loudest. The steward invokes them too, but differently. Not with robes and incense, but with phrases carved out of inevitability. The gods have chosen your service. The gods see you. The gods reward the obedient. He says it like a blessing, but it always sounds like surveillance. The Queen's high priest once said to you, "The body is a doorway through which divinity walks." Then he touched your wrist, smiled, and walked away. You didn't understand what he meant. You still don't. You're not sure he did either. Religion here isn't meant to be understood. It's meant to be followed. The temples are the most beautiful places you'll never really belong in. Yes, you're allowed to enter. Yes, you kneel at the proper times. Yes, you recite the chants with everyone else. But you're not of them. You are sacred only when convenient. You are holy only when framed in candlelight and fruit. You are part of the spectacle, not the mystery. The gods never speak to you directly, but they're used to explain everything that happens to you. Why your robe was torn during a ceremony, a sign from Sekhmet. Why you were passed over for procession, a lesson in humility from Thoth. Why your favourite fruit was replaced with bitter olives, a divine test of gratitude. Everything is sacred, which means everything is justified. One evening, a festival is held in the great courtyard, celebrating the Nile's return. You're placed near the edge, painted in gold dust, eyes outlined in kohl so thick it takes 3 washes to remove. A priest approaches. He murmurs something about blessing the water through beauty-made flesh. You are touched, not cruelly, not gently, just purposefully. You smile, that's the rule. Later that night, you ask the moon if it saw. It says nothing, just keeps being worshipped, just keeps shining. You are told that to be chosen by a god is the highest honour. But gods never ask what you want. They just take. They take your silence, your breath, your name. They take the way you once looked at the stars and felt possibility. Now when you look at the stars, you see symmetry, choreography, approval. You whisper prayers anyway, not to the gods who are carved into stone, but to the ones no one dares name, the ones who see, the ones who know, the ones who maybe, just maybe, were also once held like a hymn and broken like a rule. There's a hallway in the palace lined with eyes. They aren't real, of course, just painted, carved, stamped into the limestone by artisans whose names were never recorded. The eye of Horus stares from every tile. Some eyes open, some closed, some bleeding light, some crying blood. You walk past them each morning on your way to the House of Sound, where they teach you to sing in a language no one speaks anymore. The steward says the hallway is sacred, that it listens. You believe him. Not because you've felt it, but because you've seen what happens when someone speaks too loudly inside it. A boy once whispered something, a joke, barely audible. The others laughed, just a breath, nothing loud. The steward appeared before the echo died. No rage, no fire. Just 3 days of silence. No assignments, no oil. No food outside the bare minimum. When he returned, he sang quieter. His voice never quite recovered. Belief here is not a choice, it's air. You inhale it, you exhale it, you survive it. You're not allowed to question why some gods have animal heads and others do not. Why one god governs fertility and destruction. Why the gods need tribute if they are so divine. Why bad things happen to the pure. Why purity is required from you, but not from those who use you. You are not allowed to ask, but you are allowed to sing. The House of Sound is not for everyone. Only a handful are selected. You are chosen because your voice is calming. That's the word the priest used. Not beautiful, not strong, calming, like a breeze, like a drug. You're taught to sing invocations, praise poems, songs of rising sun and returning grain, songs for openings, songs for closings. Some have words, some do not. Some are just notes repeated in endless patterns until your throat forgets how to stop. You're never told what they mean, only how they must feel. You don't learn grammar, you learn mood. Your voice becomes another offering. One day during rehearsal, a high priest stops you mid-note. He leans in close, studies your mouth, and says, "Your tone is dry. Are you ungrateful?" You say, "No, Holy One." He nods, walks away. No one explains what just happened, but you're assigned extra vocal drills the next morning. Control here is never blunt. It's gentle, soft-spoken, covered in honey and reverence. You're not ordered, you are guided, you are not punished, you are realigned, you are not forced, you are blessed with opportunity to serve better. Language is everything. Even the cruelty has a ritual tone. A noble woman once whispered that her concubines are little priestesses in prettier robes. Everyone laughed. You smiled. You were not hers, but it still applied. Everything here applies to you, even when it doesn't. You begin to believe that. You begin to hear the gods in everything. In the way the wind shifts through the garden. In the way the steward pauses before speaking. In the way a candle refuses to go out, flickering just enough to hint at meaning. You don't believe in salvation, but you believe in patterns. And patterns are what the palace runs on. There are rituals for everything, for waking, for bathing, for choosing which robe to wear. Each colour has a meaning, a frequency, a sacred correspondence. White is for reflection. Blue is for healing. Red is for reception. Green is for unseen things. Some days you wear green without knowing why. Those are the days you are watched more carefully. There's a calendar, but you don't get to see it. Only the priests know what each day means. You're told to prepare for the festival of the sacred flame. You ask what it celebrates. The priest says, the fire within us all. You nod. You wear the golden sash. You stand by the brazier. You offer fruit to a flame that eats without gratitude. That's the other thing about belief here. It's performative. But the performance is real. Not because it's sincere, because it's endless. You can't separate the show from the truth. After enough time, you don't try. You begin to pray for things you never would have imagined. Not freedom, but clarity. Not escape, but endurance. Not justice. Just invisibility. Long enough to rest, to breathe, to be. You stop praying for the gods to change anything. Instead, you start praying to them not to notice you. Because every time they do, it costs something. You see boys elevated to divine companionship, a phrase that means they are requested more often, dressed more brightly, seated closer to power. You see their faces sharpen, their sleep thin, their smiles ache at the corners. One stops speaking completely, except during ritual. Another begins laughing too loudly at things no one said. Another begins writing poetry on scraps of linen. He hides them under his cot. You read one once. It said, "The gods are mirrors, but some of us are glass, cracked by the eyes that worship us." He was gone by the next moon, reassigned, elevated, diminished, erased, all of those probably. You still remember the poem. It felt dangerous. Not because it was blasphemy, because it was true. You realise belief here is not about truth. It's about function. Belief keeps the gears turning. Belief keeps the silence full. Belief keeps boys like you smiling, while everything they are is slowly dismantled and rearranged to resemble gratitude. And if you do it well enough, if you believe hard enough, they'll say you've reached harmony. They'll say you are one with the gods. They'll say your suffering has made you beautiful. And you'll smile, because that's the rule. You're invited to the inner temple. That's what they call it. Invited. As if you can decline. As if this is not the culmination of everything they've been sanding you into. You've seen others return from it. Or rather not return at all. They reappear, but changed, quieter, calmer, devoted in the way statues are. Immovable, beautifully empty. They say nothing about what happens inside. They just bow more slowly. They just blink with a delay. They smell faintly of incense and finality. You're told to fast for 2 days, to cleanse in sacred oils, to shave your arms, legs, chest, to prepare the body for presence. You're told not to speak after sunset, not to look in mirrors, not to eat anything sweet, not to dream if possible. You are told again, this is an honour. You nod, because that's the rule. The night before you are given a scroll, a prayer in a language older than sand. The priest instructs you to memorize it, not for performance, for alignment. The words mean little to you, but you repeat them anyway, over and over, until they lose shape, until they become rhythm, until your thoughts fall into their cadence and everything inside you goes quiet. The inner temple is not large, it is not grand, It is plain, cold, unadorned. One window, one altar, one stone basin filled with something that smells like old water and iron. You are left there, alone, no instructions, just silence. You kneel, because that's what you were trained to do. You recite the prayer. Not because anyone asked, but because the silence demands it. And somewhere in the silence, something shifts. Not outside you, inside, not a voice, not a vision, nothing divine, just stillness. Thick. Pressing. Like the room is watching you breathe and deciding whether you are worth continuing. You stay there until your legs forget their shape. You stay there until the candle burns out. You stay there until the door opens again, and the priest beckons without speaking. You're not told what it meant. You are not praised. You are not touched. You are led back to your wing in silence. And when you pass the others, they look away. Because now you are part of it. Now you've been through the core. Now you understand that belief isn't about understanding. It's about surrender. It's about dissolving so completely into the ritual that you no longer recognize your own boundaries. You no longer need instruction. You no longer need permission. You are the ritual. You wake the next morning without being summoned. You dress before the robe arrives. You speak the prayers before they are required. Not because you feel them, because they feel you, like muscle memory, like breath. This is how belief completes its work. By replacing your inner monologue with hymns. By sanding down your resistance until what's left fits neatly inside the chamber of control. The gods do not need you to love them, they need you to serve them. And the palace is full of servants who confuse the two. There's a story told during harvest festivals about a man who saw the face of a god in a pool of still water. He reached for it, and the water broke, and the god disappeared, and the man was left with only his reflection. The priest ends the story there. He calls it a parable about reverence. You think it's a warning. The closer you get to divinity, the more of yourself you lose. Even joy here is filtered through belief. You're allowed to enjoy music, but only as a form of gratitude. You may laugh, but only as celebration. You may cry, rarely, but only in awe of divine beauty. Every emotion must be traced back to its sacred source. You cannot be angry unless it is righteous. You cannot be afraid unless it is reverent. You cannot want anything for yourself, only for the gods, for the palace, for balance. This is not belief. This is colonization of the spirit, and yet there are moments, tiny, flickering ones, when belief becomes something else. Not control, not submission, but survival. Like when you whisper a prayer to keep a friend safe during a feast, or when you ask Thoth for wisdom before you speak to someone important, or when you press your fingers together in a secret gesture you made up to honour the parts of yourself that still feel private. Those aren't for the palace. Those are for you. For the version of you that once sang for joy, not approval. For the child you used to be, who believed in stars and breath, and running for no reason at all. And maybe that's belief too. The refusal to fully disappear, even when everything is designed to make you vanish. You begin to see belief not as submission, but as resistance. Not in the chants, not in the rituals, but in the choice to keep some part of your soul folded inside a secret corner of your mind. Unburned, unbowed, untranslated. You call it prayer. You call it silence. You call it self. And no god in this palace can take it from you. Not unless you give it. And that quietly might be your last offering, not obedience, but the will to remain, even if only in pieces, even if only behind your eyes, even if only in the final moment before sleep, when no one is watching, and you whisper your name to yourself, just to remember that it still exists. There is a moment, it always comes, when the mask slips. Not yours. Theirs. The priests. The nobles. The ones wrapped in gold-threaded justifications and divine right. You see it in the middle of a ritual, when a priest forgets a line and mutters a curse beneath his breath that no god ever blessed. You see it when the noble who calls you beloved offering in public presses too hard in private and whispers a name that isn't yours. You see it in the steward's face when he thinks no one is watching, and his mouth goes slack, and the awe evaporates, and you realise they are just men. Just men with costumes and better lighting. And that is when the horror starts. Because if they are pretending, what are you? You're standing in the Great Hall during the Festival of Renewal, wrapped in a robe so sheer it might as well be metaphor. You've been fasting, oiled, painted, sung into harmony. A priestess chants beside you in a tongue that hasn't been spoken outside of temple theatre in generations. There are flowers on the floor, not fresh, dried, dyed red to look like blood. It's all a show. It's always been a show. The horror is not that you were tricked. The horror is that you knew and played along. The absurdity comes fast after that, like the realization that the gods you've been taught to fear and honor and imitate contradict themselves constantly. One demands silence. One demands wailing. One demands purity. One demands indulgence. One says the body is sacred. Another says it's filth that must be purged daily. There's no logic, just ritual, just repetition, just pattern. You once watched a priest anoint a statue of Sobek, the crocodile god, with pomegranate juice because the storehouse had run out of lotus wine. No one corrected him. No one noticed. The gods were fed. That's all that mattered. You once heard two nobles argue over whether a breeze during a ritual meant divine approval or divine warning. They debated for hours. The breeze never explained itself. You once saw the high voice of Hathor trip on a sandal strap during procession and pretend it was part of the dance. You're still not sure whether anyone actually believed him. He received a pearl-studded sash the next morning for grace in motion. There's a story they tell about a boy who laughed during a death rite and was turned into a bird by the goddess Nekbet. But you met a servant who says the boy just ran away. No wings, no feathers, just fear and freedom. But the story persists, because belief is easier than correction, and magic is more marketable than failure. There's horror in that too. In the stories you're required to believe, not because they're true, but because they're useful. They teach you not to question the priest who burns the wrong herbs. They teach you not to flinch when the steward calls your compliance a divine virtue. They teach you not to ask why a god needs you to kneel if it can see inside your heart. You once saw a noble spill-date wine on a sacred tablet. He wiped it with his robe. You gasped reflexively. He laughed. "Don't worry," he said. "The gods love fruit." He didn't get punished. He got promoted. The absurdity is everywhere. You're told your voice is sacred, but if you sing out of turn, you're silenced. You are told your skin is divine, but if it bruises, you're hidden. You are told your body is a temple, but it has no doors that you can lock. You are told your suffering is meaningful, but no one ever explains what the meaning is. You once spent 4 hours arranging lotus petals in the pattern of a spiral to represent the order of creation. A priest knocked them out of place with his sleeve. You weren't allowed to correct it. The gods understand intention, he said, but not yours apparently. You kneel beside a brazier in a hall filled with painted jackals and are told to glow with inner harmony. The coals are hot, the robe is synthetic. You sweat through your serenity. You faint. The steward calls it divine release. You're told it's beautiful. Even your collapse is aestheticized. That's horror. That's absurdity. And they're impossible to separate. There's a room called the Hall of Sighs. That's not its official name. Officially, it's the antechamber of reflection. But everyone calls it the Hall of Sighs because of what happens there. Not miracles, not revelations, just sighing. You're required to sit there twice a week on a mat shaped like a scarab. You're supposed to centre your devotion, but no one ever explains what that means. So you sit, you breathe, you think of nothing, or everything. Sometimes others are there too, all of you dressed alike, same posture, same silence. No one dares speak, but everyone sighs. Quiet, weighty sighs. Not grief, not relief, something in between. Like your lungs are trying to exhale something your mouth is too afraid to name. A priest once walked by and said, "Beautiful. The room breathes with you." Then he left. You couldn't tell if he meant it as a compliment, or if he noticed the sound and chose to believe it meant something holy. That's how absurd it becomes. You don't get angry anymore. You get theatrical. You learn to cry without tears, smile without warmth, breathe without wanting to. Because emotion, like everything else, must fit the setting. There are days when the rituals contradict each other so violently you start laughing. Not out loud, just inside. The festival of endings requires silence. The dance of renewal demands joy. Both happen on the same day. So you dress for one, parade for the other, and hope the gods don't notice. They won't. They're too busy being sculpted into walls. One morning a boy burns his hand on a ceremonial torch. He cries out, just once. The priest attending him says, "That's the fire of purification." Then he sends him back to the line. The boy faints. They call it transcendence. You are told the gods test the strong. You are told pain is a teacher. But the lesson is never written down. There's an hour each day called stillness. You are not allowed to speak, move or shift your gaze. It is meant to align the heart with divine vibration. No one knows what that means. But you do it anyway. Because the steward walks the corridor during stillness, listening. One boy blinked too quickly. Not a joke. That was the accusation. Too quick. It was interpreted as restlessness, disrespect, misalignment. He spent the next 3 days in solitary service, polishing temple floor mosaics with a cloth the size of a fig leaf. When he returned, he didn't blink at all. The absurdity becomes muscle memory. You're not permitted to eat dates on days ruled by Set. You may not wear blue when Ra is absent. You are forbidden to cross the north threshold of the Hall of Breath without having first anointed your left ankle. No one knows why. You stop asking. You do as you're told because logic is the first luxury stripped away. And once it's gone, obedience becomes holy. You once asked if you could swap a robe. Your assigned one was damp. The attendant stared at you like you'd suggested swallowing the sun. "It was chosen for you," he said. "You wore the damp robe. You developed a rash. You were given ointment, scented with myrrh, labelled offering blend. It burned. They told you that meant it was working. You stopped asking after that. Sometimes the absurdity isn't even grand. It's quiet, constant. Sand in your sandals that no one believes is there. You're told to maintain eye contact when greeted by a superior, but to lower your gaze if spoken to. So you lift, you drop. You lift again. You look like you're performing a ritual nod to invisible insects. You're told to smile when carrying offerings, but not so much that it appears flirtatious. You're told to walk as if gliding, even across uneven stone, even barefoot, even during fever. You are told to smell like serenity, even when you haven't eaten in 2 days and your breath betrays the emptiness inside you. You are told to serve honeyed dates to guests, but forbidden from licking the syrup off your own fingers. One boy did. They didn't punish him. They reassigned him to the stables. He came back 2 weeks later, quieter. He smelled like hay and distance. No one asked what happened. The absurdity teaches you to forget what's real. Your name becomes a sound you rarely hear. You startle when it's spoken, like it's someone else's memory brushing past. Time stops making sense. Days are measured not by sun or moon, but by rituals. You don't say Tuesday. You say the day of cleansing. You don't say mid-afternoon. You say second bell, past reflection. You don't say I'm tired. You say nothing. Because tiredness is not sacred. Silence is. So you collect the absurdities. You line them up in your mind like beads on a broken necklace. The priest who blesses the fish, but won't eat it because he fears water spirits. The steward who reads omens from bird droppings but calls poetry frivolous. The noble who funds temple repairs but fears touching the altar cloth because he thinks linen absorbs sin. The boy who was punished for not crying during a morning ritual. The boy who was punished for crying during the wrong part of a joy festival. The girl who painted her nails with crushed pomegranate, thinking it made her look more divine. They shaved her hands. She smiled anyway. You start to see it all as theatre. Not bad theatre, perfect theatre. Too perfect. So smooth, it becomes unbearable. Because theatre ends. This doesn't. The longer you stay, the less you notice. And then suddenly, you do. Like a crack in a painted ceiling, once seen, cannot be unseen. It starts with something small. A beetle, lacquered in resin, affixed to the temple doorframe. It's been there for weeks. Everyone calls it sacred. You hear 2 priests arguing softly, debating whether it symbolises eternal life or the sun's rebirth. Then one morning it falls, and inside it's hollow. No beetle, just shell, just air. Someone glues it back with wax, calls it a test. Says the gods wanted to see who was watching. You laugh, inwardly, quietly, dangerous laughter, because you realise most of this is like that beetle. Hollow, sacred, because everyone agrees to pretend it is. And still, you keep pretending, because that's the final absurdity. You don't leave. You perform. You adjust your robe with ceremonial elegance, even when no one's watching. You bless your own water before drinking it out of habit. You bow to statues with cracked eyes and chipped chins, because that's safer than asking why a god who controls time needs a yearly repainting. You start catching yourself saying things like Ra willing or in the eye of Horus before casual sentences. Not because you believe, because the sentences don't work without them anymore. It's in you now. The absurdity has sunk under your skin like a second bloodstream. There's a festival once every moon for the opening of the mouth, where statues are touched with special tools so they can eat, breathe, and speak. You've watched a high priest perform this on a figure of Anubis whose jaw broke off last harvest. No one mentions it, they just mime the motion. The mouth opens in memory only. You once saw a boy slip during this ritual. His tool clattered to the floor. He was so still afterward you thought he'd died standing. But he hadn't. He was just waiting to be told he was still real. No one told him. He just kept kneeling, long after the ceremony ended. You learn that horror doesn't always arrive with teeth and claws. Sometimes it comes in the form of consensus, of everyone agreeing that the impossible is routine, of no one laughing when a priest says the river ran backward for 3 breaths and took a soul with it, of people nodding solemnly when the moon's shadow is interpreted as a royal omen instead of what it plainly is, a shadow. You learn that absurdity is not failure, it's policy. You live in a palace where divine authority says you can't yawn before 3rd bell, where blinking out of rhythm has been documented in official ledgers as a spiritual hiccup, where the word devotion has a dozen meanings and none of them involve your consent, where one of the highest honours bestowed on you was a scented oil massage by a man who refused to speak to you because his words were too holy to touch your ears. He hummed instead. For 45 minutes. You thanked him afterward. Because what else could you do? You were taught to find reverence in all things, even the surreal, even the grotesque, even the moments when a priest drops his script mid-ritual, shouts an insult at the wind, and then insists it was a trance. You all nodded. Because disbelief is louder than faith. And here, silence is safer. You learn to bow to nothing and make it look sacred. You learn to cry without sound and call it a hymn of the bones. You learn that the robe you wear means everything, unless someone with more power decides it means nothing. You start dreaming in prayers. But the prayers are nonsense, repeating phrases like feather of the featherless, grain of the unground. You wake with those words in your mouth and realise no one ever told you what they mean. No one knows. They're beautiful sounds stacked like bricks, form without foundation, a temple of language that floats above comprehension. And still, you recite them, because meaning is optional. Performance is mandatory. The horror of absurdity is that it doesn't kill you. It keeps you alive just long enough to train you to stop noticing it. You hear of a new rite, the ceremony of the endless flame. You ask what it is. They say, it has always been done. You ask what it's for. They say, to ensure it continues. You don't ask again. You light the candle. You bow. You whisper the lines as if they matter. Because if you don't, if you stop, even for a moment, you remember that none of this was your idea. You remember the boy you used to be, barefoot, curious, full of laughter that wasn't rehearsed. You remember wind on your face that wasn't scheduled. You remember hunger that wasn't managed, like a ritual. You remember wanting things that had nothing to do with gods. That memory is dangerous. That memory is blasphemy. So you fold it, tuck it behind your smile, and return to the ceremony. Because here, absurdity is the anchor, and horror is the comfort. It means you're still functioning, still aligned, still acceptable. And as long as you can stay that way, they won't replace you. Because once you stop performing, once the absurd becomes too loud to ignore, you vanish. Not with fire, not with punishment, but with a smile, a robe, a reassignment. They call it an elevation to silence. And the new boy who takes your place will kneel where you kneeled, and he will smile, and someone will whisper to him, "What a blessing you are." And he will believe it, until he doesn't. It starts with your feet, not pain. That came earlier. This is after. This is the soft decay of sensation. You no longer feel the sandstone tiles beneath you, no matter how long you kneel. no matter how hot the ground grows from midday sun trapped in the ceremonial courtyard. No blisters, no throbbing. Just the strange, airy feeling of detachment, like you're hovering an inch above your own life. You're scheduled to stand in the garden of Amun for the entire third bell. That's 2 hours, give or take, depending on the priest's interpretation of the sundial. Your role today is to hold a platter of dried figs and almonds beside the entrance to the library temple. You are to smile at all who enter, not too widely, just enough to register warmth. Your robe is green linen, renewal, with a sash tied precisely 2 finger widths above the navel. You follow every instruction, but you're not in your body anymore. The robe itches, and you don't scratch. The platter wobbles in your grip, and you don't tighten your hold. You watch your hands like they belong to someone else. At one point, a beetle crawls up your ankle and disappears beneath your robe. You feel nothing. You blink twice, mechanically, and resume your posture. By the time you are dismissed, your arms are trembling, but you don't notice until the platter is lifted from your grip and the steward's hand brushes yours. He gives you a glance, neutral but assessing, then moves on. That's all it takes to spiral. A single look too long. A flicker of implied disappointment. No one punishes you. You're not scolded. Instead, you are reassigned. The next morning you're given garden duty. Early bell shade tending. This is not punishment, this is correction. You're assigned to the eastern greenhouse corridor, where the air is heavy with the scent of mint and damp clay, and silence is expected. You're handed a dull bronze knife to trim the white lotus stalks. You're told to only cut the ones where the heads have begun to droop. You nod. You begin. You cut 12. By the 7th, you realise your hands are shaking. Not from exhaustion. Not even fear. From absence. You no longer know why you're doing it. The stalks bleed faint sap. It smells like wet string. Each flower you cut feels like erasing a sentence in a language you never learned to read. You finish the work. You clean the blade. You return it to the temple's tool table. You do not speak. Later, when asked if you prayed while tending the garden, you nod. You did not. You haven't prayed in days. But you keep saying you have, because prayer is expected. Belief is expected, even after it leaves you, like smoke slipping out through the cracks in your ribs. You keep performing it because the performance is the only proof left that you're still participating in your own life. Your meals come and go without taste. Bread, lentils, water mixed with a pinch of honey and lime peel. Once a week, a fig. You chew because chewing is quiet. You swallow because swallowing is easier than explaining. At night, you're given the option to sleep in the communal chamber or in the upper solarium. A room designed for repose and reflection, filled with crushed linen pillows and soft candlelight. You choose the solarium, not for peace, for silence. No one speaks there. No one touches. The walls are painted sky blue, with white cranes flying in a slow circle. You've counted them. There are 16. One has a broken wing. You stare at that one more than the others. One evening, while lying on the cool marble tiles, you begin whispering its name. You don't know if it has one. You give it yours. It feels strange in your mouth. Brittle, ornamental. Too sacred to belong to something like you. Still, you repeat it, again and again, until the sound becomes dull. Eventually someone enters and sits beside you, uninvited. They don't speak. They just sit. Their presence fills the room like a scent you can't name. You don't ask why they're there. They don't ask why your hands are curled into fists, even though there's no threat. You both breathe in the same pattern until morning. Then they leave, and you stay. Because leaving feels too decisive, too alive. You begin sleeping less. Not intentionally. You lie down, your body closes its eyes. But sleep no longer arrives with softness. It comes like fog, slow, disorienting, silent. You fall into it and emerge without rest, without dreams, without time. Once, you wake in the same position you fell asleep in. Hours later, you have not moved. Your muscles feel full of sand. You stand, you dress, you return to duty. Because even without sleep, you still remember the choreography. The horror is not the pain. The horror is that your body continues to perform. Even without your permission. Even without yourself. There's no ceremony for breaking down. No sacred oil. No procession. It happens in motion. It happens during service. The sun is up. The palace is breathing. You are assigned to the reflection pool for the 5th day of the river's descent. A ritual marking the symbolic journey of the Nile toward the underworld. You've done this duty before. It's routine. You walk barefoot along the marble ledge, scattering petals, marigold, lotus, poppy, into the still water. 1 petal every 2 steps, always with your right hand, always clockwise. There are guests watching. Not many, just a few nobles, a visiting priest from Elephantine. You begin. Your robe is white today, a symbol of quiet passage. You step, scatter, step, scatter. The water catches the petals like a mouth made of mirrors. By the 3rd loop, your pace slows, not from fatigue, from dissociation. You step, you forget to scatter. You step again, still no petals. Someone clears their throat behind you. The steward, perhaps, or the guest priest. You pause, turn. Then you drop the entire bowl of petals. It falls not in panic, but in silence. Your hand simply lets go. The petals spill in a slow-motion bloom over the stones. They roll into the water, float away. You stare, not with fear, with blankness, like you're watching someone else's mistake. Then, without speaking, you kneel to gather them. Not because it will help, not because anyone told you to, because you don't know what else to do with your hands. The priest says nothing. The nobles say nothing. The steward steps forward. You brace for correction, but he doesn't scold you. He places his hand on your shoulder and says, "You may be experiencing reverence." You nod, of course. Reverence. You're escorted from the ceremony and given rest. A bowl of water. A strip of linen to cool your neck. You're told you have done well. That losing oneself in ritual is a mark of devotion. You nod again. Because that's easier than saying what you were really thinking, which was nothing. No great vision. No divine ecstasy. Just the numbing stillness of not recognizing your own fingers. You're not punished. You are praised. And that somehow makes it worse. Later that night, you're called to attend a private recitation. The chamber is small, fragrant. 2 other concubines kneel at your side. The room is lit with alabaster lamps and perfumed with crushed camphor. The priest recites from the Book of Breathings. Slow, measured phrases about eternity and identity merging in the afterlife. You are to echo each phrase after him. You do. Your voice sounds steady, clear. You even smile. Halfway through, he pauses, places a hand on your head and says, "You have learned how to contain." You don't know what that means. He does not explain. The next day, you're reassigned again, this time to the archive wing, a quiet section of the palace where stone tablets are copied and stored. It's considered a great privilege. The air smells of old reed ink and ground malachite. You're given a stool, a stylus, a scroll. You're told to copy a passage from the instructions of Ptah-hotep. You don't look at the meaning, just the shapes. Your hand moves on its own. You copy without error, without memory. Your wrist cramps. You don't stop. Even when your knuckles turn white, you keep writing. By midday, you've filled 4 scrolls. The priest overseeing you says, "Excellent. You're becoming transcription." Becoming. Not performing. Not demonstrating. Becoming. That night, in the solarium, you stare at your hands and say aloud, "I don't know whose they are anymore." Someone hears you. A boy a few cushions away turns. He doesn't speak. He just nods, once, then turns back. The next morning he's gone. You don't ask where. No one tells you. It's easier not to know. In the afternoon, a new boy arrives. He smiles too much. His skin smells of fig oil and ambition. You nod politely. You don't speak. You're told to show him how to fold the ritual cloth. You do. He gets it wrong. You correct him gently. He thanks you. Sincerely, and when he walks away, you feel a crack. Thin, invisible, quiet. Not in anger, in grief. Because you can already see where he's going, and you don't have the strength to warn him. Not because it's forbidden, because he wouldn't believe you. Because no one ever does. You didn't. The ceremonial robe they give you for the Feast of Wax is dyed indigo, embroidered with thread so fine it tangles if you breathe wrong. You're instructed to wear it for the full ritual, 6 hours under open sun, while standing at the top of the watergate, balancing a bronze vessel on your head. The vessel is empty. It's symbolic. Everything here is. You practice for 3 mornings beforehand. They make you walk the length of the gate barefoot, back straight, arms at your sides, the vessel swaying like an afterthought above you. On the day of the ritual, the heat arrives early. By the 2nd hour, your back is soaked. By the 3rd, the robe begins to chafe. Neck, inner thighs, under your arms where the thread knots. By the 4th hour, your vision flickers. No one notices. Or they do, and they choose not to. You are not a person on this platform. You are a function. An object in motion. An ornament with pulse. When the wind picks up, the vessel shakes. You stop breathing for a moment, just to stabilize it. Your lungs throb in your chest like they want to escape. You hold. You hold for the priests watching. You hold for the scribes recording. You hold for the audience that doesn't even know your name, but will remember the posture. Because if it falls, the symbolism breaks. And here, symbolism is law. By the time they signal the end, 2 bells struck in quick succession, your legs are twitching involuntarily. You kneel with care. You do not cry. You do not speak. You rise, smile, and descend the steps like nothing has happened. But inside, something has. Not snapped. That would be too clean. No. It's more like the slow seep of wine into cracked tile. Invisible at first, then permanent. Later, in the bathing chamber, you peel the robe from your skin. There's blood on your thighs. On your collar. A long streak beneath your left arm where the seam split and rubbed raw. No one helps. You wash yourself in silence. The water stings. You hiss. A boy next to you, new, always watching odds, asks, "Were you honoured to carry the vessel?" You nod. Because saying no is worse than pain. You're assigned that night to incense duty in the quiet gallery, a corridor lined with papyrus offerings and half-lit shrines. You must walk the entire length slowly, swinging the censer in even arcs, never letting the chain clink. You lose count of the shrines. They blur into one another. Hawk faces, cat faces, bull horns, open hands. Each with eyes that don't blink. Each with offerings that rot in silence. The censer grows heavier with each step. Or your arm grows weaker. It's hard to tell. At the final shrine, the chain slips. It doesn't fall, just sags. The bell at its base taps your ankle, soft, barely audible, but enough. The steward appears within moments. He doesn't speak. He lifts the censer from your grip, hands you a new one, and gestures to start again. You do. You retrace your steps. The same shrines. The same silence. This time, your pace is slower. Not out of reverence. Out of depletion. When you finish, no one praises you. You are dismissed with a nod. In the sleeping quarters, you strip to your underrobe and lie down. You do not close your eyes. You stare at the ceiling, painted blue, dotted with gold stars in constellations you've never been taught. You count them. You forget which number you started at. You begin again. Sleep does not come. Not because of nightmares. Because there's nothing left to dream. You wake in the same position, unsure if you ever slept. You're scheduled for stair washing. A lowly task, ceremonial in name only. 12 steps, limestone, polished daily. You are given a rag and a bowl of orange-scented water. You kneel. You begin at the bottom. The scent makes your eyes water. By the 6th step, your fingers cramp. By the 8th, your knees begin to bruise anew. By the 10th, a noble steps past you and drags his robe through what you've just cleaned. He doesn't look down. You wipe it again. You finish the 12th step. You sit back. The bowl is empty. You tip it forward to show the steward. He nods. No words. Just motion. Like everything else now. Your reward is solitude. They let you rest in the vestibule, a small alcove behind a reed curtain, meant for prayer but rarely used. You sit. You breathe. You count your ribs by touch. You press your thumb to the small scar behind your ear, the one you've had since childhood, the one no one here knows about. You whisper your name to yourself, not the title they gave you. Your name, the one your mother whispered when she washed your hair. It tastes foreign now, but it's still yours. And for a moment, that feels like an act of rebellion. You almost cry. Not from sadness, from recognition. Then a bell rings. 7th call. Time to prepare for the ceremony of ascension. You rise, slowly. Your knees ache, your back burns, your skin hums where the robe had bled it. But you rise, because you know how, because you always do, because collapse doesn't stop the ritual. It just joins it. You walk back into the light, and no one can see the pieces missing, because you smile. And the gods don't require wholeness, just performance. You're sitting in the quiet now. No bells, no robes, no priests with hollow eyes reciting lines older than memory. Just breath. Yours. Shallow. Even. Practiced. The lamp in the corner flickers low. The incense has burned to a thread of ash. No one is watching you anymore. But you still sit straight. You still keep your hands folded the way they taught you. You still measure the silence like it matters. Outside, the wind moves through the palm trees. Not like an omen, not like a god. Just wind, and for once, no one names it. You close your eyes. Not in devotion, not in despair, just to close them. And in that brief moment, with nothing left to sing, nothing to serve, no performance left to give, you remember the sound of your own breath before it was ever ritual. And then you drift. No ritual. No robe. No name. Just darkness. and the soft, quiet relief of no longer needing to believe in anything at all.